I'm Ariana Bennett, and welcome to this 2 News Investigates special program. More than 160 years ago, the discovery of gold and silver in the northern Nevada hills changed the area from barren desert to boomtown. The Comstock Lode, as it was called, made millionaires out of mine owners. And it also led to Nevada's statehood, since the precious metals mined in the then Nevada Territory were needed to fund the Union effort in the Civil War. But our legacy in mining hasn't only passed down a positive inheritance. A chemical process used to extract precious metals in the late 1800s has left an enormous pollution problem that even longtime Nevadans might not know about. Millions of pounds of mercury in the land, water, and wildlife. And if we're not careful, it can make our people very sick. In this special program, I'll explain the issue, how we got here, how it's impacting our population, and what to do to keep yourself and your family safe. Starting with, don't eat the fish from the Carson River watershed. It's a beautiful spot for a day of fishing. But you won't want to eat what you catch. Lahontan Reservoir is home to the most toxic fish in the world. The problem is mercury, high levels of the heavy metal that over time have built up in the fish, the waterfowl, and the plants, all throughout the Carson River watershed.
Mercury is a serious neurotoxin, or, it affects the nervous system, especially in children.
The Environmental Protection Agency has had their eye on the problem since 1980. In 1990, the whole area was put on the National Priorities List as a Superfund site, a designation for some of the most polluted, potentially dangerous parts of the country. In the 90s, the EPA did some work to clear out some of the most contaminated soil. But the site spans 330 square miles, east from Carson City to the Lahontan Valley, past Fallon, including the Big and Little Washoe Lakes.
Because it's so extensive, because mercury is so ubiquitous, it's so challenging to try and locate it all and address it.
So, unable to fix the problem for decades, the best they could do is tell people about it.
It's safe to swim, it's safe to recreate, catch and release fishing's fine, but we don't want people eating the fish.
And for good reason. When it comes to mercury, the EPA and Food and Drug Administration consider 0.46 parts per million in fish to be the limit for safe eating. For example, in tuna, a higher mercury fish, there's a median amount of 0.34 parts per million. In 1981, researchers found a striped bass in the Lahontan Reservoir with 23.65 parts per million, more than 50 times the amount of mercury already considered unsafe. 40 years later, the mercury problem is still very much an issue. In 2021, the EPA released an updated set of recommendations to manage the site. The agency considered 4 options, from doing nothing to major actions like removing soil from riverbanks and placing rocks to shore up erosion-prone areas. But those more comprehensive plans come with hefty price tags, between $162 and $212 million over 30 years.
It may be great to be able to clean up all the mercury, but 14 million pounds of mercury that's been scattered over 130 miles is a pretty monumental task.
So the EPA is going with a much cheaper option. Monitor the site and try to increase awareness so people don't put themselves at risk.
What can we say most specifically is don't eat the fish.
EPA officials say eating one high mercury fish isn't likely to hurt you, but eating the fish regularly or during childhood or pregnancy could cause major health problems. Mercury poisoning can cause vision problems, muscle weakness and tremors, speech impairment, and major birth defects involving the brain.
The biggest health effect that we worry about is really the neurologic system. That highly volatile kind of early developmental phase is really susceptible to mercury exposure. And there have been a lot of studies that have shown the detrimental effects to future cognition.
Unfortunately, once it's in your system, there's not much you can do. So when it comes to mercury, the best treatment is prevention.
So generally speaking, there really is no treatment for a mercury overload or mercury poisoning per se. If you know that you've been exposed to a large amount of it, there are things that can be done medically, like chelation therapies, things to try to remove the amount that's there right then from the body. But exposure over time, there's no treatment for. The best way to treat it is just to avoid being exposed as much as you can.
Even with the effort to increase public awareness, with such a large area to cover, there are long stretches of shoreline with no signs. Now, they did get some extra funding from the 2021 federal infrastructure bill. So coming up on this special, we'll show you how they're using it to test new technologies that might make it easier to find the mercury and keep people safe. But first, we will take a trip back in time to the Comstock circa 1860 to show you how the mercury got into our water to begin with. Stay with us. I'm Ariana Bennett, and welcome back to this 2 News Investigates special program on Northern Nevada's mercury problem. As any Nevada school child knows, the precious metals in our mountains put the Silver State on the map, and mining is still a huge part of our state's economy as well as its identity. But there have been some consequences of the mining boom that happened during the early days of Nevada's statehood, and 160 years later, we are still living with some of them, including high levels of mercury pollution in the land and water. So how did it get there? For that answer, we'll have to go back to the Comstock of the 1860s.
It would have been noisy, it would have been dirty, it would have been dusty. It would be a bustling community of 20-some thousand, 1875 people.
In the mid-1800s, the hills around Virginia City were swarming with optimistic prospectors, hopeful miners, and all the boarding houses, shops, and saloons that sprang up to sustain them.
It was not a comfortable city to live in. The mills were operating, and there were so many of them that you could feel that vibration in the ground.
It was a prosperous time, betting on big payoffs from risky gambles, that the tunnel you blasted into the mountain would yield something shiny. And often enough, it did.
The Collar Mine was one of the main mining operations on the Comstock. It produced millions and millions of dollars in gold and silver.
Every speck of silver and gold that came out of those mines could mean the difference between a rich year or a shuttered operation. It also meant an enormous amount of tax money that the Union effort wanted during the Civil War. That led to Nevada's statehood in 1864.
Technically speaking, Nevada did not have sufficient population to legally be made a state. But because of its input to the federal government, to the coffers and what have you, it was just short of the actual population necessary. But they made it the state anyway.
With the modern equivalent of billions of dollars at stake and a war on, mining companies relied on the mills.
Welcome to the Donovan Mill.
Like this one in Silver City, Nevada.
Most of the mills around this area were stamp mills, very similar to this one.
From 1860 to about 1890, there were 236 mills in this area that crushed the ore from the mines and then processed it using mercury.
There was usually a copper plate that was laid on the bottom of the table, and then they would smear mercury on top of that copper plate. And the ore would come out of the stamps, which was ground really fine, and the gold and the silver would stick together with the mercury, and that would be called an amalgam.
The mercury was expensive and had to be shipped in from mines in California, so the mills recaptured and reused it.
There would have been a fire of some kind underneath that would heat up the amalgam and therefore vaporize the mercury.
But a lot of it escaped.
There's tailing piles, as you can see, all over the place, where there's some mercury that got away.
The EPA estimates roughly 14 million pounds of it got away over the 30-year period between 1860 and 1890, at which point the mills switched to a more efficient method that used cyanide instead. When mining activity eventually dried up, the mills shuttered, many still full of old tailings and the remnants of the mercury used to process it. It might sound unthinkable to allow millions of pounds of mercury to enter the soil and water, but back then, concerns about the environment were a distant second to financial gain.
There was many other industries that started because of that, so it made Virginia City a wealthy town, and the whole country, to tell you the truth.
The Comstock Foundation, which owns the old Donovan Mill, is working to preserve that history. They're restoring the site, hoping to get the stamps back up and running, and to open it up to the public for tours. To see the mill site or help out in the restoration effort, we have all the information posted online at 2news.com. Now, the Caller Mine is already offering tours to the public. You can find it on F Street in Virginia City. Now, once the mercury escaped the mills, it washed downstream into the Carson River watershed, where it traveled more than 100 miles into reservoirs and communities, including native lands. How that's impacting the people of the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe, as this program continues right after the break. I'm Ariana Bennett, and welcome back to this 2 News Investigates special program. Now, if you look long enough at a map of the Carson River watershed, you'll see why it's been so hard to manage the mercury on the Superfund site. The water flows for 130 miles, and any flooding just expands the mercury's footprint. Now, it's traveled from the mill sites around Virginia City through the Dayton area to the Lahontan Reservoir and out past Fallon into the Stillwater Wildlife Refuge. And on its journey, it passes right through reservation lands of the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe, where it's impacting the people and their customs.
It knows no boundaries. Where it goes, it affects everybody.
Unlike some of the other parts of the Carson River Superfund site, on reservation lands, the people know about the mercury problem.
It's a health concern for all of us here.
The EPA's study found unacceptable health risks for tribal members practicing a traditional tribal lifestyle. For them, the mercury means a further departure from their ancestral way of life, of hunting and fishing and using water plants for food and materials.
These are constructed completely out of tule and cattail. The cattail itself and the tule were used to eat as a sustainable food source, like infinitely sustainable.
Those plants grow abundantly along the waterways near the reservation. But now, knowing about the mercury, the risks are too great.
I'm not going to go to the Carson River or any of those main sources to go get this because I have to handle it. I have to go re-wet it. I have to put it in my mouth.
Sustainability is integral to traditional native diets. Alan says it's not just what they're eating, but the ritual that goes along with it.
The food and the water is kind of the first thing. It's not the fact we can't go with our friends and family and go hunting. It's the fact that we can't go with our tribal people and go have a traditional rabbit drive and then come home and do all these things with our people in that same activity circle that would keep us healthy as it did for 100, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years. The problem is we aren't sustaining our bodies enough to sustain our mind and our spirits and everything else that's involved with us to go and make things right.
We reflect with, land and water and the animals and the environment. It's Mother Earth, and you're polluting it. So that affects us a lot. Well, everybody it affects, but to us, we hold the earth sacred. So, yeah.
Before it can make it onto reservation land, most of the mercury, about 92% of the total that flows down the river, gets trapped in the Lahontan Reservoir. So as we've mentioned, the fish in Lahontan are some of the most toxic in the world. That water is nice for recreation, like swimming and fishing, but it is vital for farming in the Fallon area. So what does the mercury mean for agriculture? When farmers use it for irrigation, does the mercury make it into the plants or the animals that eat the plants? And is it safe then to eat products from Fallon? Well, if there's one good piece to the mercury puzzle, it's this.
We did look at, what would be the impacts of all the agriculture in the Fallon area, and we did not see a problem with that, nor with the cattle, livestock industry down in the Fallon area at all.
So in its report, the EPA found, quote, no elevated health risks for Lahontan Reservoir surface water used for irrigation around the city of Fallon and Churchill County, Nevada. Therefore, bioaccumulation of mercury in agricultural plants, including fruits and vegetables, or as forage for cows and steers and heifers, does not appear to present an unacceptable risk, end quote. The EPA scientists explain the issue like this. Because mercury is a heavy metal, it falls to the bottom of the reservoir. Down there, the smaller fish take it in, and the bigger fish eat the smaller fish. And over time, the mercury builds up, what they call bioaccumulation, into toxic levels. Closer to the surface, where the irrigation water comes from, the mercury levels are lower. So both the water for irrigation and fish that stay higher up in the surface water are safer. So, bottom line, if you're worried about your Fallon Hearts of Gold cantaloupe, don't be. They also say fruits and veggies people grow in other parts of the Superfund site are safe too. While the irrigation water might not be an issue, rain and floodwaters are. They've washed mercury out of mine tailings, riverbeds, and reservoirs, and it's soaked into the soil. Over the decades, some of that land has been used for housing, and the people who live there might not even know. So after the break, we'll look at the efforts to find the contaminated soil and how homeowners can check if their land could be toxic. I'm Ariana Bennett, and welcome back to this 2 News Investigates special program. The mercury we've talked about so far has a major impact on water use, like fishing. But the mercury that pollutes the water has also polluted some of the land. And as Northern Nevada's housing crunch continues, developers are looking for new places to build, including land that's on or near the Superfund site. This type of mercury is mostly dangerous if it's ingested. So mercury in the soil isn't likely to harm you unless you eat it, which for most people is not a problem. But if you have kids who like to play in the dirt, it could be. And there are a lot of families who already have homes in the contaminated area and may not know it.
That looks great. Okay, so we want to do grab samples here too?
Yeah. Here we're looking for metals. We're looking primarily for mercury, arsenic, and lead.
Lead?
1200.
And
mercury 185.
Okay.
It's pretty hot.
Researchers from the Environmental Protection Agency are on the hunt for an unpredictable danger that's been moving and expanding its territory for more than 160 years. This part of 6 Mile Canyon is just a tiny slice of a 330 square mile area from Carson City through Fallon, considered potentially contaminated with mercury. In 1990, it was listed as a Superfund site, a designation for the most polluted parts of the country. As we mentioned earlier in this program, the mercury comes from old mill sites that operated during the heyday of the Comstock lode. Some of that mercury was reclaimed, but the EPA estimates about 14 million pounds of it ended up washing downhill from 236 mills into the Carson River watershed and the surrounding land.
In this part of the site, we look near the mill sites and kind of the drainages, where water goes over time. And so floodplains, drainages, anything like that, that's where we'd be looking for mercury.
Finding all the high concentrations of mercury here, though, is a needle in a haystack problem. There's only so many soil samples they can take, and getting lab results is a slow process.
Sure.
Okay.
So during this site visit, they're using funding they've received through the 2021 infrastructure bill to test new technologies that could make the search way more efficient.
And then if you look at bare soil, it looks way different, right? There's a lot of minerals in here that we can measure or detect using this instrument.
We're able to see in real time all of these metals, and then we record the data for later.
If these scanning technologies show results that match the physical soil samples, then they can use them to scan much larger areas.
Accuracy 2.7 feet.
Not bad.
And most importantly, let people know if they find high levels of mercury on their properties and fix it, something they haven't been able to do on a large scale before.
Usually the path we go is taking off the top 2 feet of soil and covering it with new clean soil, or sometimes just capping the soil, putting new soil on top of it.
Some landowners in the Fallon and Dayton areas have already gone through this process. And as our housing crunch continues, more developers are eyeing open land like this, inching ever closer to the Superfund site boundaries.
Lots of homes and economic development in the area, so there are houses being built along the highway, and it might end up in this direction.
Now, there are a lot of homes that are already built within the Superfund site, many built before it was even established in 1990. So if you think you might live in one, the EPA does have a website where you can check your address. To do that, you will go to this site. It is the main page for information on the Carson River Superfund site. You go up here to the top where it says Address Lookup Tool. Then you're going to scroll down to the address lookup box and go ahead and type in your address. And I'm going to use the one here from the old Donovan Mill site because we know that one is in the Superfund site there. So you can kind of see it's going to come up with some suggestions. Click on the one you want. It's very important, otherwise it won't work. And then as you can see, it pulls up results showing that you are in fact part of the Superfund site there. And then it gives you instructions on what you can do if that's the case. Now, if they find high levels of mercury on your property, they will pay for the mitigation. And thanks to funding from the federal infrastructure bill, they say they can do more of these more quickly. But it's worth mentioning that this only applies to individual homeowners. If you're a developer, you will have to pay for any soil mitigation yourself. In Nevada, just like sagebrush, wild horses, and an independent spirit, our wide open spaces and the enduring legacy of the mining boom are part of our identity. Now, the mercury is part of living here too. The risks it brings aren't temporary. Technology hasn't yet come up with an elegant solution for environmental problems on this scale. But knowing about it means keeping ourselves and our families safe. So, for the link to check your address, information about the Donovan Mill or the Collar Mine, or to read the full site plan from the EPA, you can go to our website, that's 2news.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this 2 News Investigates special program. I'm Ariana Bennett for 2 News.